Hello, strangers. But it's funny, because you look kind of familiar. Today's story is number 69. Nice. My childhood home was in a rural area in Oregon. I had a normal childhood mostly. It was just me, my mom, my dad, my baby sister, and my dog, a beagle called Scrambles. In the summers, I was usually kicked out of the house to go roam around in the trees behind our housing tract. Sometimes I'd take my little sister, Kara, with me. Always, I'd take Scrambles. We'd wander around in the woods, poking sticks into dark, mossy logs, and giggling when fat, fish-white bugs erupted from the rot. Other times we'd build little fairy houses. Kara loved this game. She'd get really into it. She'd name the house's occupant and decorate the little stick houses with flowers and rocks, stuff like that. There was also a drainage ditch that ran behind the neighborhood. It was perfect for catching jars full of tadpoles. All in all, it was a pretty Norman Rockwell-style experience. I guess my dad's brother, Uncle Trevor, wasn't impressed though. He came over for a family cookout, and I overheard him asking my dad if we kids were in summer sports yet, then other activities. Finally, sounding a little exasperated at my dad's no, nope, nuh-uh responses, he sort of jokingly blew up. "Geez, Rob, you got him out here playing with mud and sticks." I guess that comment got under my dad's skin. The next thing I knew, he had a work crew show up, and after clearing a couple of trees, they built a little playground. It was simple, built out of wood and shaped like one of those L-shaped Tetris blocks. From left, shorter leg to longer right, it went monkey bars, a little tower with a pointy top in the center that had a slide going down from the tower, and 2 swings. My sister was over the moon about the little wooden tower. The top became her princess castle, and the little sandbox underneath became the pirate beach where we played treasure hunt, burying things in there for each other to find. We had an amazing summer playing with it, but as the school year started, we just had less and less time to play out there. Weekends, sure, but as winter set in, it's not snowy where we live, but cold and rainy, well, we just stayed inside. My mom insisted my dad needed to cover the sand in the sandbox under the tower, which he put off doing for a while. Then Scrambles brought home a dead, sand-covered squirrel through the doggy door. Dad was out there the next day with a bright blue tarp and the sand was covered. About the dead squirrel, though, it was kind of gross. The first time I'd ever been that close to something dead. It freaked Kara out a lot, too. This led to a very cautious conversation with my mom about what happens when we die. Kara later confidently told me it was just like toys with batteries you can't change. When the body wore out, your mind just moved into a ghost or fairy mode and wandered off, leaving the body behind. And also, according to her, there were a ton of reasons you'd go ghost, the way she put it. Fairies were like really good people who got magic as an award for having led a good life and being nice to people. Ghosts, however, were people who'd done bad, cut in lines or littered their chewing gum to make those gross blotches on the sidewalk. Ghosts didn't have magic or prettiness as a punishment for what they'd done. Having pronounced her very black and white concept of the meaning of life, Tinkerbell edition, she went back to making pies out of Play-Doh to feed her dolls. She seemed unfazed, but around this time, she also started having nightmares. My mom and dad thought it was the whole death talk. Maybe so, because she saw a ghost man. She said the ghost man was outside in the backyard and that he was yelling at a fairy. When I asked her what they were yelling about, she shot me one of those, "Oh brother, you're such a dummy" faces. Then Kara explained to me it was because the ghost man was mad to be a ghost and not a fairy like the lady. That would be why he yelled. I asked Kara, what does he yell? Expecting something childlike and whimsical like blueberry corkscrew. Imagine my surprise when my sister, all of 7, turned to me and said, "He goes, 'Look what you made me do, you fucking whore.'" Record scratch. I begged her never to repeat that. If my mom heard her use the worst cuss words, oh man, I'd probably still be grounded. But the mystery remained. Scrambles never alerted to anything in the backyard. There was no way an actual man or woman were having a screaming match back there. Also, Kara went to bed at 8 p.m., while my mom, dad, and I stayed up until 9 p.m. It was impossible that 2 fully grown adults were getting past both my parents and me and Scrambles, all to hang out next to my dad's barbecue and swear loud enough at each other to be heard through windows closed against the winter chill. Kara was true to her word about not saying the big bad F word again. She understood it to be a curse like a witch does a curse. That's all I had to do to convince her not to say it. She didn't want to risk doing something bad and not being a fairy when her body's battery died. Well, I just figured she'd heard the words somewhere. In the jumble of being a creative little kid, she'd just crafted a story around it to make it make sense. I only thought about it when she'd report having had a nightmare, which was still happening, round 1 time a week or so. Well, fast forward through the winter to the spring, Kara was anxious to get back to her princess tower. By the week before spring break, the weather seemed to hold, and it hadn't rained for days. It gave the puddles a chance to dry. I took her out there one Friday afternoon after school to see how it had fared the winter. At first, all looked perfect, but then I noticed that one edge of the bright blue tarp was flapping over the little wall surrounding the lower bit of the tower. Specifically, that little wall encircled the sandbox. We'd secured the tarp with bungee cords, but I figured the wind, hopefully, or an animal, less hopefully, had slipped in between the elastic bands. Kara and I approached, looking for obvious signs of digging or, far grosser, scat. But the surface of the sand looked undisturbed. I was still in school clothes, so I couldn't do much more than just look at the sandbox. But as Kara scarpered up the ladder and began redecorating her little princess tower, I grabbed a stick and began absently poking about in the sand. My confidence was coming back steadily with each poke and fling, not turning up anything objectionable. At least it was. Until, as I poked, then pushed the stick out to flick the sand, I also brought up a little white object. It looked like a bit of white rock, or bone. I thought back to Scrambles and his grisly discovery, then shrugged and decided that's what it was I'd found, a little animal bone. Though this one was about as thick as a Crayola marker, it was really little and short. I kept going poke, flick, with my stick in the sand. Another bone, similar in shape, was unearthed. There wasn't anything gooey or furry attached. They were just little white bones. Feeling bolder, I used the stick to wipe back and forth over the sand where the 2 bones had emerged. I was already thinking about archaeological digs and how men in khakis and wide-brimmed hats would sort of sweep sand away and reveal a full dinosaur skeleton all laid out. I wanted to see what kind of animal we were dealing with. A minute of sweeping, and I saw the shape. 4 long bits, straight up and down, which kind of looked like legs. but no, they weren't quite legs. These 4 long stacks of bone were all in a line. It was like how a kid draws an animal, all flattened out, not how on real animals you'd have 2 legs on one side, 2 on the other. Weird. I swept off the sand a little higher, hoping for an animal skull to help me identify it. But there wasn't one. The 4 long legs simply joined a cluster of little bone chunks. Further, there was a shorter line of bones off to the side of the 4 I'd already uncovered. A neck? It was much shorter than the other 4 lines. I swept higher again, and my stick skidded over something revealed to be shiny. Gold. My digging must have alerted Kara, as she'd clambered down the other side of the tower to take a peek. She took one look at what I'd unearthed and began to scream. Startled the hell out of me. This wasn't a playful shriek or a faked sound. What came out of my baby sister was pure, glass-shattering terror. I rushed to her side, fearing the worst, that she'd disturbed a snake or landed wrong and rolled her ankle. I didn't know. Her scream echoed in a woods that had gone still. There was no birdsong. There were no insect chirps. The silence felt heavy and weird. I grabbed my sister, yanking her up against me like I used to pack her around as a baby. I tried to cut through her screams, shaking and squeezing her a little, asking what was wrong. She was crying by then, those deep sobs that left her gasping for breath between cries. I just held her, looked around to see if I could see a snake trail or anything. But my eyes finally fell on the sandbox. All at once, I felt my blood run cold. I knew why my baby sister was screaming, and it made me want to scream too. From where I'd been standing, and because I was thinking small animal, I'd been reading little legs and arms and stuff into the shape, trying to fit my expectations over it, like the Who's That Pokemon shape game. But from where Kara had looked, with no such expectations, the shape of what I'd uncovered was obvious. It wasn't a small animal. It was a human hand. The glint of the watch, gold in the light, put it into a context, called up a shape that fit it like a glove. A pun I didn't mean then or now. I tore back home, never minding how mad my mom would be at the mud Kara's flopping shoes were leaving on my school pants. Well, we told my parents everything. They called the cops, and we weren't allowed to return to the Princess Tower for a couple of weeks. I snuck out there once just to see, to confirm what I already knew, but I couldn't get close. The trees surrounding it were roped off in official yellow plastic tape. I don't think my parents wanted to tell us anything, given how morbid the whole thing was, but we pressed for details. Over the years, we got our answer. The hand that had been found was just bones the whole way, so stripped from the sand that any flesh was long gone. They'd had to drill into them to get DNA. It was a woman's right hand, and it pointed to a missing person from the previous fall. But nothing else was found in the sandbox or the surrounding woods. The watch she'd been wearing wasn't in the missing person's description, but my dad told me sometimes cops hold details back. That way, if they get who they think is the bad guy, they can listen to see if the baddie slips and gives details he shouldn't know. That is, unless he'd done the crime. I was wary of speaking much about it to Kara, more out of not wanting to get into trouble. It was like the yellow plastic tape not only surrounded our tower, but also the words and thoughts around what we'd found. I felt like I'd be in trouble for even speaking about it. But Kara, I guess she didn't feel as much restriction as I did. For we were sat in the den watching cartoons one morning when, during a commercial break, an ad came on. It had a man and a woman arguing on it. The man's face was getting redder and redder, while the lady sort of smirked and rolled her eyes. She'd better watch out. I startled. Kara had spoken out loud, but we hadn't been talking about anything for a while. I didn't understand what she said. I asked her to repeat it. Kara looked at me. I said she'd better watch it. She keeps smarting off. She'll make him do something bad. Something that they'll both regret. I wasn't understanding, but the memory of months prior struck me. How could it not? My little sister, looking like a slightly aged Gerber baby, roughly imitating the deeper voice of an angry man, saying, "Look what you made me do," followed by such an insult I felt bad hearing it. Her seeing a man and a woman arguing. Well, rather, a man arguing, yelling. Feeling like I was daring to get too close to the edge of a steep drop, I asked Kara one final question. Does the bad thing have to do with our sandbox out in the tower? She turned back to the TV. Yeah, of course. Can I have cereal? I didn't dare ask further. I just got up and got us both some cereal, trying my best not to think about that further. As for the tower, once the tape was gone, my parents told us we could resume playing out there. But neither Kara nor I wanted much to do with it. We'd go into the woods, but it took a few weeks before we returned to the tower. I remember thinking it was like a band-aid, and if we could just return and face it, rip it off, we'd be able to somehow go back to normal and reclaim our former place of fun from being a source of nightmares. We did return, and we tried playing like nothing bad had ever happened there. The sand had been somewhat depleted from the police sifting through it, but my dad had dutifully refilled it with brand new sand. Not wanting to be ungrateful, I had tried to dig around in it, rebury some of the cheap trinkets that served as Kara's pirate treasure. Made it all of 2 days before my half-hearted digging in the sandbox turned up a long, pink, fake fingernail. Well, that was it for the Princess Tower. Kara and I stopped going entirely. We resumed our old games, blanket forts, tadpole hunting. The following summer, we had another cookout. Along came Uncle Trevor. He saw Kara run by, with her wagon full of old peanut butter jars drug along behind her. The contents of said jars was murky with drainage ditch water and baby frogs. Uncle Trevor said something to my dad about us still playing with mud and sticks like cave people. He then asked if my dad was going to deprive those kids of some good clean fun, like a clubhouse. While the hollow terror of that spring has faded, I've got to say, the look my dad shot my uncle in that moment was pretty scary too. And that was the 69th story, from a pile of about 400. I guess we've got a ways to go. If you'd like to reach out, email and socials are in the description. Interacting with the like, comment, and subscribe features does something, allegedly. And otherwise, we'll meet again next Tuesday. Stay strange, stay safe, and take care, strangers.